If they somehow fumbled that ball and then Rutgers hit a field goal, it'd have been pandemonium for the Nebraska fans, because all I know is watching Nebraska, some of their fans in the stands were like losing their minds already when they had to punt anyway to Rutgers. And then obviously they threw the pick, but it was like, man, I thought it was going to happen again. But what I was going to ask is do you think, obviously we don't know because he's not there anymore, but do you think if Scott Frost was the head coach still at Nebraska, do they beat Indiana and Rutgers? I mean, it's impossible to know, but what do you think on that?
Well, I was going to say as a joke, in reaction to your fumble comment, that Scott Frost, with his arms folded on the sideline, having absolutely nothing to do with that snap and what happened, it would just be his luck and the Nebraska luck under him that they would have lost the fumble had he been standing on the sideline, even though he did absolutely nothing wrong. And I don't believe that, but anyway. On one hand, I would say that Nebraska must be a more disciplined football team and taking care of business in the fourth quarter. So they have won 2 fourth quarters here. So Scott Frost, notorious for losing 1-score games, had the worst record by far in the country in 1-score games. And most of those, well, there was a majority of those that were blown in the fourth quarter, of course. And I'm not talking about they were down by 3 scores. They came back to make it look close. No, they were in the game the whole game into the fourth quarter, and they blew the game. They got outplayed or whatever happened. And we know that they were one of the most penalized teams in the country. Just mistakes. They had like 5 false starts last year against Oklahoma and this year against Oklahoma, ironically, that they seem to be a more disciplined team. However, the penalty numbers would tell you otherwise, that they were just as penalized the last 2 weeks as they were, even more under Mickey Joseph. But I can't really answer that question. I would just be, nobody can answer that question. As you just said, we would be spitting at the wall on that one.
Yeah, he'd probably lose by 1 score, but we don't know. But I was also going to ask, so far this season, do you think that Indiana is the worst Big Ten East team, or is it Rutgers?
That's a great question. I think that since Indiana has some semblance of a passing game, Connor Baselake is a better quarterback than the 2 that play for Rutgers, and their receivers are better. I think Indiana has a higher ceiling. I think that when they're playing well, like they did in coming back against Illinois, sure, they got a lot of breaks in that game, but still they beat what's become like a mid-level Big Ten team in that game. I don't know that Rutgers is capable of that. Indiana can play a low-scoring, more defensive-sided game like Rutgers, or they can open it up and play a more high-scoring game and still be competitive. So I think they can win different ways, and I think they've got a higher ceiling. But Rutgers, with this defense that they've got, certainly they have a Big Ten caliber defense, and Indiana generally does not. It's a close call. I'll go with IU.
IU is being better than Rutgers by a little bit, yes.
By a little bit, yep.
So the thing about Indiana, I never mentioned this the other night, but DJ Matthews and Cam Camper were out against Nebraska, and I'm not saying that they would have won, but that did affect that game because, as you're saying, Indiana's passing attack is good, and against Illinois, Cam Camper and DJ Matthews had most of the yards in the passing game against Illinois, and against Nebraska, since they were out, their passing game was way worse. So I do think that if they both play, I think that Indiana would have maybe had a better chance of beating Nebraska. I think that did hurt them having them both out because Indiana can't run the ball because the offensive line is terrible.
They dropped 5 or 6 passes, correct, against Nebraska?